Hey Rebels, welcome back to the channel. I'm seeing a major trap in the markets right now, so I wanted to take this time to dive into the charts and see what the data is actually telling us. Because if you're thinking about selling right now, I'm telling you that might be the worst idea that you have this cycle. So let's just dive into the analysis here and let's see what the charts have to say. So what we're seeing right now in the crypto market is extreme fear, and I just wanted to quickly highlight the different times that we've seen extreme fear in this bull market. And just at a glance, you can see very clearly that the times where we see this peak fear are typically marking the bottoms in a bull market. And if we just go back to the last couple cycles and just see what happens during the peaks, anytime we've actually peaked, at the very least, the sentiment has been in greed. At the very least, even if we're not overcooked and we're not extremely greedy, these major tops happen at some kind of greed. So we just haven't seen that sentiment line up. We are seeing cycle analysis, basically right on the tick, right at the end of the 4-year cycle. We've hit that pretty much right on the nuts, and we're starting to see this weakness right here. So there is a little bit of cause for concern. There's uncertainty in the market for sure, but that is just one part of the analysis. The cycle analysis is just one piece of the puzzle. So just because we've reached what typically ends the Bitcoin cycle, that does not mean that that 4-year cycle has to repeat forever. It also doesn't mean that we want to completely ignore it because, all we have is the previous data and we have to basically take everything with a grain of salt and just see multiple layers of what the market is trying to tell us. Okay, so I also have another chart here that I wanted to go over, which is the gold chart, because this is actually very significant right now. So I'm hearing a lot of chatter on the gold chart, and I'll actually stick this to the monthly. We have 11 months to the upside in gold. That means 11 months without price breaching the low of the previous bar. Now you can see earlier here we had 8 months in a row to the upside, and then price breached the lows of this bar, creating that downswing. This single swing had 8 consecutive candles. This has 11. And we have to go all the way back to, let's see, 1971 to where to see any kind of monthly swings to that degree. Otherwise, 8, as far as you can see from my little swing counter here, 8 seems to be the typical extent of a single move. Now, that does not mean that gold can't go higher this cycle, but we're seeing peak euphoria in the gold market. This is a great example of what peak euphoria looks like. I don't know if any of you have heard anybody talk about gold, but recently, just from my own anecdotal experience, I've heard a lot of people start to talk about gold that typically aren't interested in markets. And that is also a very typical sign of an extended move or a top, at the very least, a local top in a market. So gold looking very overextended. People are just lining up out the gates trying to buy physical gold. I've seen videos of just people lined up for blocks trying to get into physical exchanges to buy physical gold. So the other thing that I have here that I would like to add here is Bitcoin onto this chart here. And I will go and drop that into a pane below. Very useful to do on the charts. And what I've done here is I've just marked up the tops of gold, and I'll just go to this previous cycle here. And what you can see is typically when gold peaks, it went on a long sideways consolidation, and that was basically right before Bitcoin started to do its blow off move. So, and then why don't we just, for fun, go back here to the previous cycle. I'll put this on a logarithmic scale so that you're not quite getting the full effect of the scale. But the idea here is that once gold peaked, Bitcoin went on its move. It doesn't look that crazy on this scale because it's logarithmic. But if we do a measured move, basically from here to the top, it did a 10,000% increase. Obviously, we're not going to get that this cycle, but I'm just saying this was a major move in Bitcoin right as gold started to peak. So that is one little layer of hopium there that typically financial assets, as far as gold goes, recently it's been linked to financial conditions, which leads the ISM. The ISM is the business cycle. I've talked about that many times on this channel. And why don't I just pop into a chart here real quick, just because we can. This is the ISM, which is basically just the business cycle. And we can see also, if I were to keep that Bitcoin chart on here, what we see is we see Bitcoin peak right near the peaks of the ISM, almost on the tick. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the tick, but very, very, very close. And we can see that we've just been in a very long consolidation of contraction in the business cycle, waiting for that to breach. Gold is a leader of ISM. So what we're seeing in the gold chart, you saw that gold was consolidating for quite some time. That's basically represented in the chart right here. And then we had that blow off move in gold. We're about to see that in the ISM. And the ISM is also akin to or is highly correlated to the altcoin performance. So we just haven't seen that altcoin performance yet because we haven't seen the ISM take off. It's highly speculated that we're going to need to see lower rates for that to happen, and that very well could be. That seems to be on the cards, but we'll just have to let the data come in and show us. One thing that I really like to see, I've been talking about the channel for a long time, is we have to see higher volumes. And what we saw, which was really good, is we saw higher volumes here, and we're seeing sustained higher volumes so far. We haven't seen a major fake out yet. If we see volumes start to drop back into these levels, that will be cause for concern. But right now, seeing this higher volume is actually a positive sign. The other thing that I will mention too, one thing I didn't mention in the weekly analysis, but it did rear its head. We had major inflows on the Bitcoin ETFs, and typically these major inflows are marked tops rather than giving you some kind of indication of when you should get into the market. You can see the same thing with the lows here. These major outflows typically lead to higher prices eventually. You can see the price really didn't get much lower than this major outflows. So we're starting to see some pretty good outflows right now, which is a good sign. And so we'll have to wait for the weekly analysis to come through and see where we end the week on this. If we see elevated levels here, we might be nearer a bottom than a top. So I think the things that are really working in our favor right now are basically the sentiment and the business cycle. Liquidity in general still on the rise. So I don't think that it's all over. The charts are looking weak. There's no doubt about that. We've been talking about that actually for weeks on the channel, where Bitcoin is starting to show some weakness. We haven't been able to get sustained price action above this all-time resistance level. So it's just knocking its head here, just not quite able to breach this really 120K level. And so what I see here too, though, is we have our 50% tool. We use this all the time on the channel, and we can see that we're actually still in strong territory for this move. And it's really not until we start getting closes and lower highs below this level, perhaps below this major trend, that we're going to really actually be concerned. So that doesn't mean that there's no more room to the downside. But it just does mean that Bitcoin, the charts are telling us that we're actually still in strong territory. We've been consolidating in general in strong territory. This could be major distribution, could be short-term distribution. Obviously, it's short-term distribution, which sometimes when charts have this kind of expanding shape like that, that's kind of a clear distribution sign. But we also got that same pattern here where we were getting expansion. Typically, accumulation is usually tighter ranges, a little bit more ordered, not quite as volatile. And so, yes, we did have a pretty major short-term distribution here, right down to trend, and before we had another move higher, right? And so, the other thing too is that Bitcoin's typically done 30% to the downside in nearly every drawdown. So why don't we just mark down 30%? What does 30% look like on the charts here? 30% looking pretty dire as far as market structure goes. And so if we close and hold at 30%, then yes, we're probably going to have some discussions about Bitcoin topping. However, Bitcoin topping does not mean it's the end for altcoins, because typically altcoins peak after Bitcoin as a whole. Some particular altcoins will peak before Bitcoin does, but there's a lot of altcoins that will actually go into that phase, which makes sense because you're starting to see capital rotation. All the people are selling out of Bitcoin. That means they're taking profits, or people are panic selling out of their positions. However, people will also panic into the altcoin space when they start seeing this capital rotate into those other assets. There's a lot of people, basically, their whole hopes and dreams are basically banking on this altcoin season happening. And so I'm just trying to give you a little bit of hopium here. I mean, we really do have to just trust the charts and go back to the charts every single time, because they will lead the way and they will tell us the information that we need to know. No YouTuber is going to be able to tell you if it's the top, if it's the bottom. We can just go through our various data and try to be as unbiased as we can so that we can basically understand what the market is telling us for both sides of the story, right? So Bitcoin dominance still actually looking to be weak. We had this major rally here. We're still weak. We are technically in an uptrend on the weekly time frame. This is a pretty exhaustive move. We will have to see how we react. Does not look like Bitcoin dominance is in a very strong position right now, so that is good news. One thing that we are going to have to watch like an absolute hawk is we have this bar right here where we got all the way up to this trend and closed below. That was the market telling us in that week that USDT dominance was weak. We've since had a rally. Whether this is a dead cat bounce or not, we'll have to see. We can see that so far, well, obviously we have to wait for the weekly close, but we can see that we have not closed above the 50% level, if we start to see multiple closes above this 50% level, as well as a breach of this downtrend, those are going to be major concerns that we're going to have to contend with, and we're basically going to have to sober up and face reality. However, we're just not there yet. So typically, during these peak times of fear, are not going to be the times that you're going to want to sell. Now, you need to have a plan before you get into the market. You need to have your invalidation levels yourself before you even get into the market. So if we reach those levels, then you're out. And it's not really a big deal because it was always a part of your plan. If you're just in the market blindly with no plan, that's when it becomes really hard. That's when it becomes almost impossible to create a plan after the fact, right? So if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So that would be my biggest advice is if you didn't have a plan going into this, formulate a plan, start learning how to read the charts and the data for yourself and not rely on so many other people. Now, I consume a lot of crypto YouTube. It helps me kind of keep on track and but it really depends on who you're following as well. So not to say that YouTube content is totally useless. Obviously, I'm a creator and I consume a lot of YouTube. But the point is you really have to go in yourself with your own plan and learn one style of analysis rather than having 100 different people with 100 different views on the market trying to decipher what's up and what's down. Stick to one type of analysis that you've found to be consistent, and that's what I've done. I use GAN analysis. And I choose people to follow. My mentors have been in the markets for, several decades, and they use the same type of analysis to formulate their plan. So this is the type that I use. This is the type that I like to teach on the channel. It's given me a lot of insights. It's very useful. So that's what we do on the channel. So in the short term, looking obviously weak, but we do have that extreme fear. So that does not mean the exact low is in. We can go for lower prices, but as far as the sentiment goes, it's seeming as though that's being washed out. The other interesting thing to note, the market always tells us a story, right? So we had this breach of this total two versus Bitcoin. We've been talking about a long time. Came back down for a very volatile retest, closed very strong. And at the moment, the total two is actually holding up pretty strong relative to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's having a pretty bad week this week, and the others are actually holding up, or excuse me, the total two is actually holding up relatively strong. The others versus Bitcoin, which is probably what most of us are in, somewhere outside the top 10, most likely, still have not breached this downtrend. So we're in a weak position. We've been in a weak position for years. And every single rally we get, people get very excited about this, the potential in altcoins. The potential is still there. I just want to say that in markets, it's always potential energy. It's always potential energy until we start to really trend. I mean, this is a clear downtrend. We've just been trending down. So yes, the farther we trend down, the more potential energy to the upside, possibly. But until that happens, we just have to watch the charts. I've been talking about this key level right here, this buy zone, for a long time on the channel. Historically, we've retested this level every single time in the altcoins before they outperform Bitcoin, and we just had that happen, volatile retest, possibly a slow bleed. But once we breach this downtrend, we're going to be feeling a lot better. So the whole point of this is that the hardest time to buy is when it feels the worst. And so when we're going into max fear, max pain, it's going to be the hardest time to buy. I'm not encouraging anybody to buy. I'm not encouraging anybody not to sell. I'm trying to showcase how the emotions are going to mislead the situation and how you can go into the charts and just see what has happened historically to give you some kind of idea, because that's all we can do. We can only go back into the past. It does not guarantee performance of the future, but it's the closest thing that we have to, forecasting the future, right? What else? What else? Let's go to total three. Total three still in the top half of the bull market. As far as this bull market goes, we're still in strong territory here on the 50%. We'll have to see how this week closes. If we get multiple closes down here, we're just looking weak. And we may just basically need to be waiting for the business cycle to ramp up. Interest is going to wane from the market. People are going to lose interest. They're going to be mad. Basically, people are in anger and depression right now, which is typically you want to be a step ahead of that. When the market is angry and depressed, you want to be a little bit optimistic. You want to start maybe having a slightly contrarian view and seeing what information is out there that could give you a lead on that possibility, while also keeping in mind, that could be invalidated. Give yourself some invalidation so that you don't just blindly choose the analysis that is going to support your view, because that's also very dangerous and you're going to lose a lot more money basically trying to be right rather than learning how to read the markets in real time. I think that's probably going to wrap it up for this video. Short and sweet. I just wanted to give a little bit of insight that I think we're in a major trap zone right now. I mean, yes, we're seeing weakness in Bitcoin and a lot of fear and everything, but overall, we're not in extremely weak territory, and things can turn around very quickly. And, even just drawing our simple trends again. Now, trend lines aren't foolproof, they're not perfect, but I would not be surprised to see us come down to trend if we're going to go higher. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. I think I'm going to leave it there. I feel like there was a couple other things that I wanted to get into, but I think we're just going to leave it at that. Hopefully this was helpful, guys. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. All right.